What is a beautiful house? In this series, I've been arguing that there's something wrong with many of the new houses in Britain. There seems to be widespread agreement that we could do a lot better, but beyond that, there's disagreement about just how to improve things. The whole question of what's beautiful and what isn't is one we don't feel we can answer with any certainty. So that's why, in this programme, I'm going to talk head-on about beauty, why it matters, how to know it when you see it, and why it's become such a difficult and even embarrassing subject to talk about. How much should we care about beauty? Is reading interior design magazines and agonising about soft furnishings proof of a superior soul, or a sign that you're a superficial and possibly even worthless person? Oscar Wilde said that the wrong kind of wallpaper could make him cry faster than a death in the family. He was an extreme case of the kind of person called an aesthete. I was on my way to meet one. Stephen Calloway lives near the Elephant and Castle in South London, but can't bring himself to go there because its ugliness distresses him too much.
So Stephen, what's the bulk of your collecting tastes? What have you got?
I suppose it's art historical in basis, but it's all the kind of things that a 19th century aesthete would have collected, I suppose.
Do you think that beauty does enable people to live more happily?
I think it's an enormous sort of enhancement in terms of mood and happiness, yes, absolutely. I would certainly, place aesthetic considerations higher than sort of ordinary comfort, for example. I mean, you're sitting on one of the most uncomfortable sofas in London, but I actually don't like what a great big squishy sofa looks like in a room, and therefore I wouldn't have one. I'd actually only have a little kind of upright Regency sofa, because that's what, to me, creates the effect that I want.
Do you get upset when you see ugly things? Does it strike you very personally? Do you get sort of anguished?
I mean, it is actually sometimes sort of positively painful. The classic public space in the centre of an English town these days is a kind of ghastly pedestrianised area with bits of torn paper going around in circles. Those concrete planters with 3 dead shrubs in them. It's not exactly Renaissance Italy, and yet, it could be. At that point, it was considered, if you were kind of the ruler of a small Italian hill state, it was considered very, very important that you demonstrated your civilization by making things look as good as possible. To see the kind of buildings that people are expected to live in these days, I think is outrageous.
You might feel that suffering on a sofa and making detours to avoid the local shopping centre might be taking a concern for appearances too far. In a world of disease and bloodshed, caring about the look of things has a hard time sounding like a sensible, adult thing to be concerned with. But in case you're tempted to dismiss Stephen's position, it's worth considering just how much heavyweight support there is for it from the world's religions. From the very beginnings of architecture, people have felt that buildings could be the repositories for valuable feelings and ideas, and have venerated them for that reason. Some 4,000 years ago, a group of Neolithic Britons dragged these massive stones to a hillside in Wiltshire and built a burial chamber to commemorate one of their leaders. They wanted this building to speak to them, and perhaps also to us, of things that they thought were important, but knew that they were in danger of forgetting.
From the south, I call upon the fire, the spirit and the passion of the ancestors to be with us in this ceremony.
The blessing of the salmon of wisdom, who swims in the clear, sacred pool.
You can feel that there is an energy here, call it what you will, But for me, it evokes a sense of reverence, of remembrance, and of honouring. And it's very much, although we can say it's an honouring of death, it's as much an honouring of life.
To me, they bring just the memory of who we are as human beings, as who I am as a human being, and just all the way back through time that people have felt the same as us. You know, they didn't feel any different to us. The same emotions, the same heartbeat, the same bodies.
For most of the history of Christianity too, the dominant idea has been that buildings can have the power to help us stay true to the central tenets of the religion. The Catholic Church devoted vast resources to the decoration of churches and cathedrals, with the express idea that a certain kind of building can literally reorient our souls, can turn us into different and hopefully better people. The monks of Mount St Bernard, a Cistercian community in Leicestershire, rebuilt this monastery in the mid-19th century.
There's a view that worrying about things like colours, the shapes of chairs, the quality of a window frame, that these things are quite superficial. Come to a monastery and it's almost like you're invited to see these things as really quite essential to a godly life. So what's interesting about monasticism is just how seriously questions of design, of style are taken.
You see, I think with this monastery, they were trying at the time, they were recreating something in a sense. Although it's not a museum, it's a living monastery, and we're still living the same life as they lived in the medieval Cistercian monastery. But really, you'd have to go back to the medieval monks to see just why they chose to build in that particular style. This certainly speaks to me, this kind of architecture, more than it would if this built was just a big square.
The monks' original motive is worth thinking about. They felt that where a person is heavily influences what he or she can believe. In constant danger of being led astray by the commerce and chatter of our societies, we require places where the values inscribed in our buildings will encourage and enforce the best aspirations within us.
When I came here, I felt very much at home immediately in this church, which is one of the things that drew me because it's so simple.
Do you feel that this is in a way your home?
Oh yeah, very much, yeah. Oh, I don't want to be anywhere else. I'm quite happy.
Because in a way it's not very homely. There are no picture frames of loved ones or...
we can have pictures in our rooms, things like that.
But it's interesting to hear someone saying that this very bare space could be their true home.
For me, I wanted something that wouldn't sort of distract me or clutter my mind. If I go out, I'm always glad to come back. I'm always looking forward to getting back. And when I walk through the doors to the cloister, rather than getting a sense of coming inside a building with walls, I get the complete opposite, really. I get a sense of real freedom.
The Catholic reformer St Ignatius wrote, "Believers must take care when building churches, for what is before our eyes can impress us deeply. Countless items of information can be imprinted on our minds through colours and lines in a fraction of a second." In Catholic thought, beautiful architecture wasn't just a luxury, it was a lesson. The architects and artists of Islam have traditionally been just as convinced of the power of a building to influence us for the better as their Catholic counterparts. Central to Islamic thought is the belief that coming to a beautiful building isn't just agreeable in itself, it's about experiencing a direct and convincing manifestation of the faith.
There's a long association in the West between beautiful environments and luxury and a kind of decadence, as though spending time in beautiful places was actually going to corrupt us. But what's interesting about a lot of Muslim theological thinking on the matter is the suggestion that actually a beautiful environment could make you good, because what we call beauty is really the material manifestation of what we might, at a psychological, moral level, call goodness. Beauty is goodness written into matter. So by looking at, let's say, a beautiful geometric wall, you're not just looking at something pretty, you're taking in, subtly, a course in ethics. You're learning to become a better person.
In both traditional Islam and Catholicism, the moral equation between beauty and goodness lent seriousness and importance to all architecture. We might even come to understand God through buildings, because, as the 11th century Muslim philosopher Ibn Sina said, God is at the source of every beautiful thing. But with the rise of Protestantism within Christianity, there emerged a new school of thought about the role of architecture.
The essence of the Protestant worldview is that the state of your soul has nothing to do with where you happen to live or worship. What counts is inside. What counts is the contact that you have with the Word of God. That's why the great Protestant reformers, Calvin and Zwingli, told their congregations that they should never waste money doing up their churches. You could find Jesus anywhere, even in a stable. So by extension, Protestant sects would argue that you're as likely to find Jesus here on the Widford trading estate outside Chelmsford as you are in Notre Dame in Paris.
This theological dispute between those who thought it mattered desperately what our surroundings look like and those who thought it frivolous or even decadent to care about such things lives on in our contemporary debates about the relative importance of architecture.
But don't you think there are some places that can help you to get in touch with God? That actually, maybe those heating ducts, ventilation ducts, they're not, you look up at those and you don't think God, you think, I don't know. You don't get spiritual when you look at that, whereas sometimes those cathedral ceilings, you look at those and it puts you in a mood. Do you know what I mean?
No, I don't know. It might put you to sleep.
Right.
I think if you close your eyes, you don't see them. We don't.
So it matters what's inside.
It matters what's inside. It doesn't matter what's outside. I don't think really that makes any difference to the people who come to this church.
So they don't mind the carpet?
No.
Or the chairs?
No.
Or whatever. That's not what they're here for.
No, I think actually they're quite relieved that they don't have to take a lot of care of everything and be reverent when they walk in.
Whether religious or not, most of us will instinctively have an innate sympathy for one or other of these two approaches, Protestant or Catholic. But today we live in a largely Protestant world. The dominant message we get is that beauty is well down the list of priorities. Come to a place like Swindon and it's clear that the older Catholic and Islamic message has been comprehensively sidelined. We may still be Catholics in our hearts. Few of us would choose Swindon as a holiday destination, but on an intellectual level, we find it hard to make the case for beauty against more utilitarian demands for humanity's resources. A beautiful building seems to have none of the unambiguous advantages of a vaccine, a ring road, or a bowl of rice. Personally, I incline to the Catholic view of beauty, and I'm going to tell you why. But first, I'm going to ask a different question. Why can't we agree what's beautiful and what isn't anymore? The feeling that we can't persuade anyone else of what's beautiful is familiar from personal life, as anyone who's ever had a row in a furniture store on a Sunday morning will testify.
So, what are your disagreements about?
Colour, taste, everything. Yeah.
I don't like colour, too much colour.
We can't seem to agree about taste anymore.
Definitely disagree.
Will there be tears in the shop?
The last time we
Last
come
time
in,
we come here, we was, yeah.
Really?
We was like,
She was
arguing, I was
arguing over
crying.
kitchen doors.
And we can't even agree about how to resolve our disagreements about taste.
I
Well,
shout
we-
about his.
We both
but
disagree on everything, but we've got two houses, so she has her now, she wants her, and I have mine how we want her.
So what happens when you have an argument? Who wins?
Me.
All the time. Yeah.
How come? How do you let her?
I'm
It's
the boss.
easier.
Does she win or do you win?
I win.
Why do you win?
Because I'm the woman.
You shout loudest.
Me, I'll get stroppy. I win.
Do you? So if he said it's got to be red, what do you say?
Okay, I'll just put brown cushions on it.
So you're pretty accommodating. So he really rules the roost, does he?
No.
The future. And do you have two houses because you can't agree on taste?
Yeah.
It got that
Right.
bad.
One of the reasons why people don't protest more about how ugly many new houses look is that no one's supposed to know what's beautiful. We live in a world where there's a general feeling that beauty isn't something you can ever make generalizations about.
Now, you might like these tiles, and I might not, but the point is that nowadays we're told that there's no such thing as a beautiful tile or indeed a beautiful house. It's all supposed to be in the eye of the beholder. It's not something that you're supposed to be able to make generalizations about, as you might make a generalization about science or politics. There's no such thing as objective beauty. There's just what you think is beautiful, and that's it.
Unfortunately, our awkwardness around taste has been a gift to property developers because it's made us diffident about criticizing what they do. If no one can say with certainty what's beautiful, then maybe anything goes. Chris Crook is Managing Director of Countryside Properties.
Do you think there's such a thing as good taste and bad taste?
Only in the eye of the person exercising it.
What about in music? Do you think the music of Barry Manilow is better or worse than the music of Bob Dylan, say? No, but I'm using that example because people tend to say, when it comes to houses, one man's taste is as good as another's. When it comes to music, they'll go, yeah, God, Barry Manilow. So there's much readiness to be a bit more blunt about when it comes to things like music or even food. You know, people will recognise that, you know, a certain kind of food is better than another. But when it comes to houses, people get very coy and they're like, oh, well, if you like it, or I don't know, etc., etc. It's quite an odd thing, isn't it?
No, I don't buy into that. You couldn't fail to be impressed by coming home, driving up to that house and say, that is mine, isn't that lovely? I'm happy here.
So how did we get into this stalemate, and what might we do to get out of it?
About 250 years ago, a large, noisy group of workmen arrived on a field a bit like this. They were carrying with them pickaxes, shovels, measuring ropes, and brick-making equipment, and they set about aggressively tearing into the countryside in order to lay down roads and put up houses. But no one complained, no one wrote letters to the council, no one even felt very sad. The reason lay with what the developers were putting up: the city of Bath.
Bath was a classic speculative development, no different in its fundamental economics from those of countryside properties. It might look timeless and mellow now, but it was developed with astonishing speed and cutting-edge technology by a businessman called John Wood and his son. At the time, it was also glaringly new and modern that Jane Austen said that the whiteness of the stone gave her a headache. But she didn't complain about the architecture, and Bath was instantly popular. That's because when Bath was built, there was a strong consensus about taste.
On and off for about 1,000 years in the history of the West, there were remarkable levels of agreement about what a beautiful building was supposed to look like. A beautiful building was meant to look a bit like this. It was meant to have a temple front, decorated columns, repeated ratios, and a symmetrical facade. A beautiful building was supposed to be a classical building.
There was seldom any desire among classical architects or their clients to be original. Fidelity to a canon was what mattered. Repetition was the norm. Classical architecture shared the largely unquestioned cultural prestige and authority enjoyed by the civilizations of Greece and Rome which had produced it. The predominantly aristocratic patrons of architecture were steeped in the philosophy and literature of the classics. They had venerated the relics of the ancient world on their continental grand tours. What had been good enough for Socrates and Cicero, they felt, was good enough for them. But from around the middle of the 18th century onwards, talking about beauty started to get more complicated. In 1759, on the shores of Strangford Lough in Northern Ireland, a newly married pair of aristocrats set out to build themselves a beautiful new home, Castle Ward. The first Viscount Bangor wanted a conventional classical mansion. But his spirited wife, Lady Anne, had her own ideas. She wanted a house in the newfangled Gothic style.
I think it would be a very male person.
It's feminine, it's imaginative, it's whimsical.
I think it would be solid, stolid, ambitious, somebody who was really quite pleased with himself and self-satisfied.
It was her money, and she was determined to get what she wanted.
Do you think it was literally sort of, they couldn't come to a decision? What should their house look like? And then eventually they thought, well, we'll do a half and half.
I think exactly. I think they both had strong opinions, and that was the only way that they could be resolved.
So this is the main room of the house where people would sit, and of course it's in the classical style. So this would have felt very familiar to him. You do get a sense of his and hers. So now we're in his, and we're about to go through to hers. And now we are completely plunged into the Gothic style. There's an immense playfulness, isn't there? I mean, after having been restrained for so long by this classical idiom, suddenly they wanted a bit of fun.
Lord and Lady Banger's disagreements about style were soon replicated across the country. A growing middle class was causing an explosion in demand for housing. The old aristocratic patrons of architecture were increasingly replaced by a new breed of professional property developers, middle-class men who were not typically readers of Cicero. More often, they were entrepreneurs with a love of variety and whimsy, who competed to attract clients through the playfulness and exuberance of their developments. But this new freedom posed a serious problem. With so many permissible styles, how could you any longer decide what was beautiful and what wasn't? Who was right, Viscount Banger or Lady Anne? We're about to meet a group of people who came at the whole question from a radically different angle. In the later part of the 18th century, a new group of people emerged who started to build more things than traditional architects ever had. They were called the engineers, products of the Industrial Revolution, men like Isambard Kingdom Brunel, who built the Clifton Suspension Bridge. The engineers had an influential new line about beauty, one that echoed in many respects the Protestant view about the relative unimportance of the aesthetic dimension of buildings.
The engineers recommended that architects stop worrying how buildings look and instead start to concentrate on whether or not they work. The emphasis should be on function rather than appearance. After all, when designing a bridge, the question is not whether the bridge is pretty or not, whether the arches are classical or Gothic. The real question is, does it work? And the engineers now recommended that all architects should follow them in their ruthless pursuit of function and efficiency.
The enviable certainties of the engineers seduced a whole generation of architects who emerged in the late 19th century and became known as modernists. The most virulent, forthright and famous of these new modern architects was a Swiss called Le Corbusier, who arrived on the architectural scene in the early 1920s. Engineers have been busy with barrages, with bridges, with Atlantic liners, with mines, with railways. Architects have been asleep, complained Le Corbusier. He boasted that the day he'd first seen an aeroplane, in 1909, was the happiest of his life. In 1931, Le Corbusier built a house called the Villa Savoie, just outside Paris, for the family of a wealthy French industrialist. Le Corbusier wanted the homes of the future to be ascetic, disciplined and frugal. He wanted them to ape what he thought were the greatest works of contemporary design, machines, and in particular, planes and cars. And he meant this house to be a demonstration of the new, stripped-down, purely functional, you might even say Protestant, aesthetic.
Even in the living quarters, the mood remains incredibly technical and industrial. one might think one had walked into some kind of factory. In fact, a lot of the fittings, like the door handles and the light switches, are taken from factories. Le Corbusier wanted the walls to be left bare and white. He hated clutter, he hated ornament, he hated pictures. He wanted the bathrooms to be the centerpiece of the house. He wanted things to be extremely clean, clean glass surfaces, glazing, light everywhere, but never anything extraneous. Everything fitted away in cupboards. He wanted something to be as clean and as tidy as a hospital. Le Corbusier hated furniture. He responded with incredible alarm when Madame Savoie wrote him a letter saying that she was thinking of buying a sofa and a couple of armchairs. He wrote her back immediately saying, "The notion of furniture must be rooted out. We must live in the houses of the future simply with equipment."
By following the lead of the engineers, architects like Le Corbusier thought they could stop worrying about the problem of what was beautiful and what wasn't. Beauty didn't matter, only function did. But they weren't being completely honest with themselves. In fact, they cared a lot more about how things looked than they led on.
Take the design of this roof. It looks flat and efficient, and that's certainly how Le Corbusier sold it to his clients. But actually it was a complete disaster from a mechanical point of view. Shortly after the Savoie family moved in, it sprung a leak into the bedroom of the owner's son, Roger Savoie, a leak so bad that Roger had to go and spend a year in Chamonix recovering from a bad bout of pneumonia. There's a hilarious letter from Madame Savoie 10 years after the supposed completion of the villa, and she complains, the roof is leaking into my bedroom, into the bathroom, into the garage. She was in an absolute panic. And really only the advance of the German armies and the flight of the Savoie family from Paris prevented Le Corbusier from having to answer for his design, for his beautiful machine for living in a courtroom.
And that's the contradiction in everything Le Corbusier said. He didn't want a flat roof because it was functional. He wanted one because he thought it looked good. And there's a more general problem with Le Corbusier's philosophy. What is the function of a house anyway? We'd be rather dissatisfied if all a building did was keep the wind and rain out. Take the snaking central staircase in the Villa Savoie. Compare it with the ornately decorated staircase in the Trianon Palace just up the road in Versailles. When you're walking up this one, you feel entitled, glamorous, fancy. When you're walking up this one, you feel modern, technological, austere. In both, equally, their function is about so much more than getting us from floor to floor. It's also to make us think and feel a certain way.
Just like all their predecessors, modernist architects wanted their buildings to speak, just not of the 19th century of aristocracy, grandeur and pomposity. They wanted their buildings to speak of the modern age with its promise of speed, democracy, science and reason. They too wanted to prompt a state of the soul.
Perhaps the ultimate irony of the Villa Savoie is that it's really rather beautiful. Its fluid living spaces, openness to light, and atmosphere of simplicity and tranquility have been hugely influential on our ideas of what an ideal modern home might look like. Protestant in his pronouncements, Le Corbusier was nevertheless a Catholic in his heart. That Le Corbusier was a bit confused about beauty might not really matter, if it hadn't been for the school of thought he pioneered. Travelling around Paris is widely agreed to be one of the world's most inspiring architectural experiences. There's a sense of order, grandeur and harmony on the big boulevards that makes you feel in no doubt about the benefits of the civilized life. And in the older neighbourhoods, the tight street pattern creates a sense of bustle and security and varied urban life. So it's a surprise to find that Le Corbusier wanted systematically to dynamite the whole of the centre of Paris and replace it with a single great park, punctuated by 18 60-storey towers stretching all the way from the Louvre to the slopes of Montmartre. Le Corbusier hated the narrow streets of old Paris. He thought them insanitary, overcrowded, dangerous to pedestrians, and obstructive to traffic. He loathed what he saw as the reactionary pomposity of buildings like the Opera House, and proposed to tear them all down, though he was willing to spare the Porte Saint-Martin as a gateway to his gloriously rational, efficient new Paris. This would all merely be an eccentric footnote to architectural history if it hadn't been for some of the places that Le Corbusier's thinking has inspired.
Le Corbusier's most poetic vision, which has inspired architects for 3 generations, was the concept he calls the Ville radieuse, a vision of an ideal city of which he's been building fragments ever since. His drawings show high flats floating in the air on their stilts, leaving the ground free for trees, people and grass.
Just outside Paris is the suburb of Bobigny, largely designed by disciples of Le Corbusier.
Le Corbusier's plans for Paris weren't completely crazy. They were picking up on some genuine problems from which 19th century Paris was suffering. He wanted to alleviate overcrowding, he wanted to increase the number of green spaces, and he wanted to do something about traffic congestion. It's just that in the process of solving one set of problems, he created a whole set of others, rather characteristic move for architects. And for the residents of the future estates that Le Corbusier inspired, the results were to be rather catastrophic.
The motor roads are lifted like bridges above the ground for fast, safe traffic to the office towers. It is a city above all efficient, a simple, comfortable life where the machine is a servant of man.
Merci Seigneur pour ta grâce, pour ta bonté.
The Charles family have lived on the 16th floor of one of Bobigny's towers for 20 years.
Vous les trouvez moches, les bâtiments? Comment vous les trouvez?
Ils sont gris, ils sont pâles, ils donnent pas envie d'habiter là-dedans.
Et c'est triste, quoi.
Ouais.
Ils n'ont pas réfléchi parce que c'est trop haut, les immeubles.
C'est trop haut?
Ouais, c'est trop haut.
C'est trop haut.
Ouais. Mon rêve, c'était avoir une petite pavillon, un petit jardin que je pourrais faire, des petits potagers.
Ouais, comme la maison dans la prairie, quoi. Charlingas. Ouais, Charlingas.
Mais en tout cas, un petit jardin, un peu de...
Ouais, des petites fleurs, des petits trucs comme ça. En été, il faut pouvoir faire des barbecues, tout ça.
Ça casse le moral.
Ça casse le moral.
By saying that all buildings had to do was to follow their function, modernist architects like Le Corbusier thought they'd done away with the problem of beauty. But in places like Bobigny, all they've succeeded in doing is reminding us how desperately we suffer from its absence. Their rigid certainties about the future are now firmly in the past, but they've scared us away from the idea that there are any certainties at all. We now live in a world where architecturally almost anything goes, where there are no rules. And that's left us more confused than ever about beauty. I've come to Dubai in the United Arab Emirates because it's one of the best places in the world to witness an architectural style that's become known as postmodernism. Postmodernists have thrown themselves back into the decorative, ornamented forms of architecture that modernists like Le Corbusier once tried to banish. They've insisted that there's nothing wrong with decorating a building in any way the architect sees fit. Here in Dubai, architects are free to build pretty much in any style they like, any colour, any shape, any material. The result is an astonishing building boom, perhaps the biggest architectural experiment in the contemporary world. And it's all been done under the indulgent gaze of Sheikh Mohammed, former ruler of Dubai, who died in January 2006. Sheikh Mohammed was certainly a man of very eclectic taste. His flagship development is the Burj Al Arab, which the Sheikh owned personally. It's a soaring 650-room, 25-story hotel, which costs $2,000 a night. On the outside, it's sleek, pared down and high-tech. On the inside, it's a breathtaking collision of science fiction, film fantasy and Babylonian excess. Next door is the Al Jumeirah Hotel, also owned by Sheikh Mohammed. It's an entire wholly fake traditional Arabic town, which one reaches by gondola.
We're used to associating the word freedom with very positive things in politics or personal life, but when it comes to architecture, you do have to wonder whether the ability to build just anything you like is necessarily always an advantage.
Sheikh Mohammed's most ambitious scheme is The World, a $3 billion development of 300 man-made islands, each the shape of a different country. Rod Stewart is rumoured to have bought Scotland.
I am sailing home again, across the sea.
Well, that's your country. That's England.
That's England?
I am sailing.
This is the Atlantic Ocean.
Stormy waters.
That's America.
To be near you, to be free.
And that behind you is Greenland.
I am flying.
Well, let's talk religion. Allah created the world, and you're creating the world. I mean, isn't there a fear of hubris?
It's a smaller world, and our world is a commercial world with no problems.
As Dubai amply demonstrates, we now live in an age with the money and the technology to build in any conceivable style.
It's something out of a movie. It's something completely extraordinary to create the world.
It is. See, Dubai is a city where dreams do come true.
Do you think it's in good taste?
It's a mixture of tastes. This is the entrance to the world. This is
The old consensus about taste that dominated architecture until relatively recent times is surely now gone forever.
Welcome to G19.
Thank you.
But I think you'd be hard-pushed to argue that the rich man's playground that is replacing it in places like Dubai is an improvement.
This is the sitting area, the bar.
Do you think this house could make you happy?
Yes, it can. I would be extremely happy if I lived in here. It's, again, to me, the most important thing about a house is first location, second view.
Postmodernism might initially have sounded like a good idea, a liberation from the indifference to beauty, which led to the building of mean-spirited places like Bobigny. But in its insistence that every conceivable architectural style is equally valid, that they're all interchangeable in the end, it suggests that there's no firm ground on which we can all debate whether one building is better than another. Both visually and philosophically, it's produced a bit of a mess. Abdullah Al Thani is one of Dubai's leading property developers.
I don't want you to touch this one, but I want
Which
to
after are you going to crush the village?
They can build it again.
You build it again.
Mr. Al Thani's new development, Dubai Golf City, will consist of 5 golf courses, a gigantic 825-room hotel, and 18 themed villages, each in the style of a different national architecture.
You're unhappy with something?
Oh yeah, the line here, the track for the
golf cart path.
Golf cart path, I want to change because the size it looks big to me. So I want to cancel all this because the reality is much smaller than this. Yes.
Okay. Is he difficult?
No, of course not. to detail.
I mean, look at this. Look at this. But it must be a rare dream, you know, for one man to control so much space. I mean, that's a dream in itself.
Yeah, as I told you, Dubai gives you that opportunity. And the vision of the leader gives you that opportunity, and you have to capitalize on that vision.
Mr. Altani's assistant, Mohammed, took me out for a spin in his Porsche to see the stretch of desert from which Dubai Gulf City will one day arise.
Isn't it amazing how when you think someone will play golf here one day?
Of course, yes, yes.
Someone will...
Yes, many people, they will come to play the course.
Won't they be hot?
No, the weather is very good. I don't feel it's hot.
I wonder where the Bali village will... Do you know where, let's say, the Bali village is?
Well, actually, as per the drawing, somewhere inside of this, in the land.
Yeah.
There's a part inside of the land.
Goodness, well, I think it's a great spot for a golf course.
Building a Balinese golfing village in the desert is undoubtedly an architectural achievement of sorts. But the question remains whether some achievements are more worthwhile than others. And that'll always be an ethical and political decision, never just a purely aesthetic one.
When anything is possible, how do you resolve taste?
We are lucky because we have one leadership who set up that vision, and His Highness Sheikh Mohammed Al Maktoum, and say, this is what I want. And all his teams working behind him.
Whereas in Britain it's more Tony Blair, but then he's got an argument with his ministers, he has to go to Parliament. Yeah, democracy is more sort of tiring.
We have democracy here.
Oh,
we
right.
do.
Right.
It's very simple, very limited.
Right. It's just a more simple kind of democracy.
Right. Of operation.
Yeah. It's often said that you can't really make any generalizations about what's beautiful and what's ugly. What appeals to you may just not appeal to me. But I think you can actually dig beneath this issue and come to some generalizations, because at the end of the day, if you don't like the way something looks, really what you're saying is you don't like what an object or a building or an interior is speaking to you about. You don't like the way of life that it suggests. Someone who felt uncomfortable here isn't just disagreeing with gold for gold's sake. They're basically saying that they couldn't imagine themselves being happy in a place like this, that the values suggested by the different bits of furniture are not their own values. The French writer Stendhal came up with this lovely sentence in which he goes that beauty is the promise of happiness. So if you find this not so beautiful, really what you're saying is, well, I couldn't really imagine quite being happy here.
One way of getting around the difficulty of agreeing on what's beautiful is to imagine what a building would be like if it were a person. What would its character be? What sort of mood would it be in? How would it vote? The advantage of doing so is that we can then argue about our architectural preferences with the same level of articulacy as we apply to our judgments of people. We might say that we love a building because it seems happy, calm, or wise, and attack another for seeming mean, reactionary, or confused. The Greek philosopher Aristotle arrived at a list of 10 virtues that he felt any good person had to possess, including courage, wit, and self-knowledge. Wouldn't it be possible to draw up a similar list for buildings? We might not all agree on the list, but we could at least have a productive discussion rather than a stale shouting match. We can analyse the virtues and flaws of buildings in much the way that philosophers have traditionally done with human qualities. Generosity or modesty, gentleness or honesty have their architectural equivalents too. Our reasons for liking buildings are not, in the end, so different from our reasons for liking people. The buildings we describe as beautiful are versions of the people we love.
I think that the building as a person would be very caring, deeply caring, but thoroughly accepting and quite stylish with it.
Strong, solid, reliable, it's not going to let you down.
I think it's more like a butler. There's somebody who's always there, is always serving, always looking after you.
It's
got to be fun. It's a fun person, if it must be a person. Tony Hancock meets Citizen Kane.
It would be female, slightly flighty, I think, a little bit jittery.
It was going to be masculine, but I think quite welcoming and quite friendly.
Jolly and happy and very content.
More gay person. There are male details, the square things.
It would be a wise person. It would be a quiet person who perhaps didn't use a lot of words.
In the next programme, I want to sketch out what an ideal modern building might look like. It's time to get downright judgmental about the houses we're building in Britain today.